When I rejected his proposal, I thought that was the end of it, but I had no idea he'd spend the next year quietly destroying everything I'd built. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena Crawford. I'm 29 years old, and I work as an architect in Austin, Texas. I've always been proud of what I do. I worked hard through college, took extra shifts, and spent years building a name for myself in a field where it's not easy to stand out. That's how I met Ethan Porter. He was 32, confident, and already successful in real estate development. He had that kind of charm that made people stop and listen. At first, he seemed perfect, smart, ambitious, polite. He appreciated my designs and said he admired my independence. We started dating while working together on a big housing project downtown. Everyone around me thought we made the perfect couple. For a while, I believed that too. He opened doors for me, sent flowers, talked about the future like it was already written. But slowly, small things started to bother me. He always wanted to know where I was. If I missed his call, he'd ask who I was with. He didn't like me going out with my coworkers. If I disagreed with him on a design idea, he'd laugh it off and say I was too sensitive. When I got promoted at work, he told me I should be careful not to make other people jealous. It sounded like concern, but it felt like control. I told myself he just cared too much, that he'd calm down with time. But the more I tried to set boundaries, the more he tried to push them. He once said, "I just want what's best for you, Lena. Sometimes you don't see what that is." That sentence stuck in my head for a long time. After almost a year together, things reached a point where I felt drained all the time. I loved my job, but being with him made everything feel heavy. I started losing sleep, dreading phone calls, and avoiding friends because I didn't want to explain why I wasn't happy. So when he took me to an expensive restaurant one evening, I thought he wanted to talk about what was wrong between us. Instead, he got down on one knee and proposed. Everyone around us clapped, but my stomach turned. I knew right then that I couldn't say yes. I told him gently that I wasn't ready, that I needed time. His face didn't move for a moment. Then he smiled, nodded, and said he understood. But there was something in his eyes, cold, quiet, dangerous. That look followed me home and stayed with me for days. I thought maybe I had hurt his pride. I didn't know that I had just started a war I never asked for. A few weeks after I turned Ethan down, things at work started to feel off. It began with small problems. One client suddenly canceled a project without any warning. Then another pulled out halfway through, saying they wanted to go in a different direction. I tried not to panic, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My designs had always been strong, my deadlines met, my feedback solid. Suddenly, nothing made sense. One morning, my supervisor called me into her office. She had a folder in her hand, and that look people get when they're about to question something serious. She said a client complained that I hadn't sent in the updated blueprints. I was confused. I had submitted them the night before. When I checked the shared files, the new documents were gone. Just gone. Replaced with older drafts. I had no idea how it happened. It wasn't the first time either. A few coworkers started acting strange too. They'd whisper when I walked by or avoid eye contact. I overheard someone say, "She's been slipping lately." That hurt because I had given everything to that firm. I stayed late, worked weekends, even skipped vacations to make sure my work was perfect. Now it felt like people were watching me fail, waiting for proof that I didn't deserve my position. Then one afternoon, I ran into Ethan at a construction site. He smiled like nothing had happened between us. "Hey, Lena," he said casually. "Heard you've been having some trouble at the firm. If you ever need help, I could connect you with someone. There's a big new project starting soon, and I'll recommend your name." I thanked him politely, but something about his tone didn't sit right. It sounded too smooth, too rehearsed. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Clients who used to praise me stopped responding to my calls. A few even refused to work with me again, no explanation. I sent out my portfolio to new firms and never heard back. It was like someone had flipped a switch and turned my career off. Late one night, while checking through company records, I noticed something odd. Several of the projects I'd lost had one name in common, Ethan Porter. His company had quietly stepped in to take over contracts that I was supposed to lead. My stomach dropped. That couldn't be a coincidence. I started digging deeper, asking around discreetly. One junior designer from another firm let it slip that Ethan told people I was hard to work with and cut corners. He said I'd been under review for months. None of it was true, but it explained why doors were slamming in my face. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the city lights outside. My name, my reputation, was being torn apart by someone I once trusted. I still didn't know how far Ethan was willing to go, but I was beginning to realize this wasn't bad luck. It was a plan, and I was the target. Haley Monroe had been my best friend since college. She was the kind of person I could call at 2 a.m, and she'd pick up. When everything at work started to fall apart, she was the only person I thought I could still count on. But then she met someone new, a guy named Chris, who, as it turned out, was introduced to her through Ethan. She mentioned it one evening like it was nothing, laughing about how small the city feels sometimes. My heart sank, but I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I just smiled and said I was happy for her. At first, everything seemed normal. Haley was busy, spending more time with Chris, but we still talked now and then. Then slowly, things began to change. She stopped inviting me out. When I texted, her replies were short and delayed. When we finally met for coffee after weeks apart, she looked uncomfortable. She said she'd heard some things and asked if I was okay. I asked her what she meant, and she said Ethan mentioned I'd been struggling since the breakup, that I was taking things too personally and burning bridges at work. Hearing that made me feel sick. I told her none of it was true, but she didn't seem sure. She nodded politely but kept glancing at her phone, like she couldn't wait to leave. Not long after that, my landlord called. He told me he had to end my lease early because someone else had offered to pay double for the apartment. I begged for time, but he said the deal was already done. I had 2 weeks to move out. I packed my things with tears in my eyes, trying to figure out where I'd go next. My savings were already low after months of lost work. I moved into a small rented room on the other side of town, far from everything familiar. The nights there were the worst. I'd lie awake replaying every moment with Ethan, wondering if I had overreacted when I turned him down. Maybe I had hurt him more than I realized. Maybe this was karma for saying no. But every time I tried to make sense of it, I remembered that cold look in his eyes the night I rejected him. I started to understand that this wasn't just hurt feelings, it was payback. Then one evening, he called out of nowhere. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I just want to make sure you're okay, Lena. You look so tired lately." I didn't know how he'd seen me, but the way he said it made me shiver. I told him I was fine and hung up. A few minutes later, I got a text from an unknown number. "You could have had everything." From that night on, I jumped at every sound. I started double-checking the locks, closing the curtains, and avoiding phone calls. It felt like he was everywhere, watching, waiting. The pressure, the isolation, the fear, it all built up until I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I wasn't just losing work or friends anymore. I was losing my sense of safety, my confidence, my peace. And that was exactly what he wanted. After months of rejections, I finally got a break. A small independent builder named Jack Marston reached out after seeing my old portfolio. He said he liked my style and wanted to give me a chance to design a new set of eco-friendly homes outside Austin. From our first meeting, he seemed honest and straightforward, the kind of person who cared more about the work than the gossip that had been circling around me. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. I worked day and night on that project. Every sketch, every model, every layout was done with care. I wanted to prove to myself that I still had it, that I wasn't the failure Ethan had painted me to be. Jack praised my work constantly and said his investors were thrilled with the progress. For a while, I let myself breathe again. I started to believe maybe things were finally turning around. Then, one Friday afternoon, Jack called sounding tense. He said he needed to meet in person. When we sat down, he looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "Lena," he started carefully, "I don't know what's going on, but my investors just pulled out. They said a background check turned up some concerning things about you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" I asked. He hesitated. "They mentioned financial issues, unpaid debts, a report claiming you falsified past projects. I know it sounds crazy, but they showed me documents." I froze. It was all lies, but they were detailed enough to look real. I tried to explain that someone was targeting me, but Jack looked torn. "I believe you," he said quietly, "but they don't. Without them, I can't move forward. I'm sorry." When I left that meeting, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel, shaking with anger. There was only one person who could have done that, Ethan. He had the money, the connections, and the motive. That night, I drove home feeling like a ghost. When I got to my building, I saw my car parked where I'd left it that morning, except the windows were shattered and the tires were slashed. Glass crunched under my shoes as I stood there, staring. There was no note, no message, but I didn't need one. I knew. I called the police, and they came, took photos, asked questions, and left without much hope of finding the person responsible. "Could be random vandalism," one officer said. I didn't argue, but I knew better. With my car gone and my money running out, I had nowhere left to turn. I moved in with a friend, sleeping on her couch surrounded by boxes of my belongings. I barely ate. I barely spoke. I felt humiliated and empty. A week later, I saw the news online. Ethan's company had won the same development contract Jack had lost. He was smiling in the photo, shaking hands with city officials. I sat there staring at the screen. He had taken everything I cared about and turned it into his victory. That was the moment I realized I had nothing left to lose, and that meant it was finally time to fight back. A few weeks after losing everything, I ran into my old mentor, Marjorie Bennett. She had been like a second mother to me when I was starting out in architecture, tough but fair, always believing in my potential. When she saw me, she looked shocked. "Lena, what happened to you? You used to light up a room." I didn't want to talk about Ethan or what he'd done, but she insisted we meet for coffee. We sat in a small cafe downtown, and after a few minutes, she leaned in and said something that made my heart race. "I was reviewing a new project proposal from Porter Developments," she said, "and I recognized something strange. The blueprints they submitted looked exactly like your old drafts from the Riverside project, the ones you showed me years ago." I blinked, unsure what to say. She pulled out her tablet and showed me the images. My designs, every line, every structure, even the placement of the skylights, were there, only with his company's name stamped on them. My chest tightened. "That's my work," I whispered. Marjorie nodded. "I know it is. And if he's been doing this with your other designs, this isn't just betrayal. It's corporate theft." Hearing that flipped a switch in me. For months, I'd been hiding, letting him tear me apart piece by piece. But now, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. I told Marjorie I wanted to prove everything before confronting him. She agreed and said, "Good. Get the evidence first, Lena. Then make it count." That night, I sat down with my old hard drives, emails, and sketches. I started going through every file I had ever saved. I found timestamps, contracts, and even old email threads with Ethan where he praised my designs and suggested small edits. Each message became a piece of proof. I organized them carefully, labeling everything by date and project name. Still, I knew I couldn't do it alone. Through one of Marjorie's contacts, I got connected to a retired private investigator named Sam Ellis. He was in his late 50s, quiet and professional, with that sharp look people get when they've seen too much. After hearing my story, he nodded and said, "He left a trail." They always do. Sam started digging into Ethan's business record. Within 2 weeks, he uncovered something I never expected. Ethan had been using shell companies to sabotage me. He paid people under fake business names to cancel contracts, leak my data, and feed lies to investors. He had also bribed 2 employees at my old firm to delete my project files and spread rumors about my performance. Sam printed everything out, bank transfers, company filings, fake invoices, and laid them across the table in front of me. "He built this whole web just to ruin you," he said. "But now we have him." I stared at the papers for a long time, a mix of rage and relief burning in my chest. For the first time in a year, I felt a spark of control returning. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had proof, and I had a plan. For the next few months, I stayed silent. I stopped posting updates, stopped reaching out to old clients, and disappeared from every professional circle I used to belong to. Letting Ethan think I was broken was part of the plan. I wanted him to believe he'd won, that I was too defeated to ever rise again. The less noise I made, the safer my next move would. With Sam's help, I took a small architecture job in a quiet part of town. I used a pseudonym and kept my head down. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a chance to rebuild my confidence. I spent my evenings sketching and working on my own designs again, the kind of creative work I hadn't touched in a long time. It felt strange at first, almost like learning how to breathe again. In secret, I kept collecting evidence. Every design Ethan had stolen, every reused draft, every renamed file, I documented all of it. I compared my original timestamps with the ones on his company's public releases. I made sure everything was backed up in multiple places, labeled and notarized. I even had signed project logs from past clients who remembered my original work. Every file I saved became another nail in his coffin. Sam kept digging too. He found a contractor named Roger who had worked under Ethan on one of the projects I'd lost. When Sam approached him, Roger hesitated at first, scared of losing his job. But eventually, guilt got the better of him. He confessed that Ethan had offered him money and job security to discredit me. Roger admitted he'd been told to say I'd mishandled designs and missed deadlines. He signed a written statement confirming everything. Piece by piece, the truth was forming into something solid, something undeniable. Ethan's fake empire had been built on lies, and soon everyone would see it. Then one morning, Sam forwarded me an invitation. Ethan's company was hosting a massive real estate showcase at the downtown convention center. The event was all over the news, a flashy launch for his innovative eco-housing line. My heart stopped when I saw the preview images. They were my designs, the same blueprints I'd drawn by hand, with only minor changes to disguise them. I stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, just calm. For the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. He thought I was gone, broken, irrelevant. But I was right there, watching him set himself up for his own downfall. I printed the event flyer and pinned it above my desk. That showcase would be the perfect stage, and Ethan wouldn't even see it coming. I didn't tell anyone except Sam and Marjorie what I planned to do. I just kept working quiet and focused. Every night before bed, I looked at the folder on my computer labeled Truth. It held everything, the files, the statements, the proof. Soon, the truth would no longer be mine to carry alone. And when that day came, I'd make sure everyone saw exactly who Ethan Porter really was. The morning of Ethan's big event finally came. The city was buzzing about it, a grand real estate showcase, hosted at the downtown convention center. Everyone important in the industry was going to be there: investors, architects, journalists, and city officials. His face was on every banner, every poster. To everyone else, he looked like a success story. But I knew what he really was: a thief standing on top of my work. I arrived quietly, dressed simply, but with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Marjorie was by my side, confident and steady, and Sam followed behind with a small briefcase that held everything we needed. My legal team was already in position, ready to send out the evidence at the right moment. For months, we had waited for this day. Ethan was already on stage, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, pretending to be humble while soaking in the attention. His new project, the Porter Eco-Housing Line, was being called revolutionary. I stood near the back of the room and watched him begin his speech. He talked about innovation, sustainability, and the importance of originality. The words almost made me laugh. When he clicked to the next slide, the screens behind him lit up with the first blueprint. My blueprint. The audience clapped, impressed by the design. He kept talking, completely unaware of what was about to happen. At that exact moment, my lawyer pressed send. Within seconds, every client, investor, and journalist in the room received an email with the subject line: Evidence of Design Theft, Porter Developments. The message contained every file, timestamp, and proof of ownership, all showing that those designs belonged to me. The effect was immediate. Phones started buzzing all over the room. People looked at their screens, then at the stage. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Some began whispering to each other, pointing at the slides. Then the screen behind Ethan flickered once, twice, and suddenly the images changed. Instead of his company's logo, the original blueprints appeared, this time with my digital signature and date stamps clearly visible. The audience gasped. It was silent for a moment, then cameras started flashing. Journalists began recording. Ethan froze mid-sentence, his face turning pale as the words on the screen shifted to show the document titles. Original Design, Lena Crawford, 2022. He stammered, trying to explain, but the noise from the crowd drowned him out. People were already checking their emails, comparing the evidence. Marjorie and Sam walked up beside me as I stepped forward. My hands didn't shake. My voice was calm. "That's my work you're showing," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Every eye in the room turned to me. Cameras swung in my direction. Ethan just stood there, unable to speak. The confidence he always carried was gone. Security moved in, not to remove me, but to control the chaos building around him. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. "Did you steal her work, Mr. Porter? Are these documents real? Is this the end of Porter Developments?" Ethan tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. His empire had just collapsed, and it all happened right there, in front of the entire industry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for me. The days after the showcase were like a storm that never stopped. News about Ethan's fraud spread everywhere: newspapers, TV, and social media. His face was on every headline, not as a rising star, but as a man who stole someone else's work. Within a week, his biggest investors pulled out. They didn't want to be linked to a scandal that big. Contracts were canceled. Projects were frozen. His company, once so loud and proud, began to crumble in silence. Lawsuits followed quickly. My legal team filed claims for intellectual property theft, defamation, and financial damages. The evidence was overwhelming. Every file, every message, every proof of ownership. Ethan tried to deny it at first, saying it was all a misunderstanding. But once the court reviewed the evidence, it was over. The ruling was clear. The designs were mine. He was found guilty of theft and deceit. I received a large settlement, more than I ever expected, along with a public apology from his firm. Seeing the statement printed in the newspapers didn't bring me joy. Exactly, it brought peace. It was proof that I hadn't imagined everything, that all those nights of fear and doubt had not been for nothing. Ethan disappeared from the city soon after. No one knew exactly where he went. His company shut down, employees left, and his office was locked up. He didn't face me again. In a way, that was enough. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had truth and closure. One afternoon, Haley came to see me. She looked nervous, holding a cup of coffee she didn't drink. Her eyes were filled with guilt. "I didn't know," she said softly. "He made me believe you were unstable. I'm so sorry, Lena. I listened quietly. I didn't hate her, not anymore. She had been fooled, just like I once was. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I couldn't go back to how things were. Forgiving her was easy. Trusting her again wasn't. We said goodbye on calm terms, and that was the last time we spoke. With the settlement money, I decided to build something real, something that belonged only to me. I opened my own architecture firm, Crawford Design Studio. It started small, just me, a few trusted people, and a rented office. But I made a promise to myself that it would be different. No manipulation, no deceit, just honest work. My first major project was a sustainable housing plan, the kind I had dreamed of creating years ago before Ethan tried to take it away. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had lost. Clients respected me for my story, for standing up for what was right. Each morning, when I walked into my office and saw my name on the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing no one owns your work, your name, or your peace ever again. Even after everything settled, the court victory, the new firm, the peace, there were nights when Lena still woke up thinking about the past. The revenge had brought justice, yes, but it hadn't erased the hurt. The lies, the betrayal, the months of feeling small, those things didn't vanish overnight. Success had filled the empty spaces in her life, but healing took longer. Some days, she would sit in her quiet office, looking at the blueprints pinned to the wall, her work, her name, It all felt surreal. She had fought her way back from nothing, yet part of her still remembered what it was like to be powerless. She realized revenge hadn't truly satisfied her. It had only cleared the path for her to rebuild herself. What healed her was not seeing Ethan fall. It was seeing herself rise again. One afternoon, Marjorie came to visit. They sat together by the big office window, sunlight spilling across the plans for a new project. Marjorie looked at her and said gently, "You didn't destroy him, Lena. You just stopped him from destroying you." Those words hit deep. Lena smiled faintly. That was the truth she hadn't put into words yet. She hadn't won by hurting Ethan. She had won by surviving him. The world had moved on, and so had she mostly. But every once in a while, his name would appear in an email or a random news article about his failed projects, and the memory would sting. Not because she missed him, but because she once believed he cared. It amazed her how love could turn into cruelty so fast when pride was hurt. She remembered the night he proposed, the smile that never reached his eyes, and she finally understood that she had escaped something far worse than heartbreak. Months later, long after she thought she'd heard the last of him, she got an email from Ethan. The subject line was just his name. For a moment, she stared at it, her heart steady, not racing. The message was short. "I never meant to hurt you that badly." That was all. No apology, no explanation, just words that came too late. Lena read it once, then closed her laptop. She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. She deleted the message and emptied the trash folder, making sure it was gone for good. The silence that followed felt like peace, a kind of quiet she had earned. That night, she stood on her balcony overlooking the city lights. The same city where she had once felt lost now felt like home again. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer defined her. She was whole, not because she won against him, but because she had learned to choose herself. And that, she realized, was the only closure she ever needed. The city looked different now. The skyline glowed against the evening light, and from her new office balcony, Lena could see the buildings she once only dreamed of designing. Each one stood like a quiet reminder of every sleepless night, every tear, every moment she almost gave up. She rested her hands on the railing and took a deep breath, letting the wind brush across her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt steady, rooted in her own strength. She thought about everything that had happened, how a simple no had turned her life upside down. She once blamed herself for rejecting Ethan, for not being softer, for not explaining more. But now, she understood something she hadn't before. Her no was never wrong. It was a boundary, not a betrayal. It didn't deserve punishment. It deserved respect. And the man who couldn't accept that had revealed exactly who he was. When someone shows you who they are after rejection, she said quietly to herself, believe them the first time. She had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. For so long, she thought love could change someone's darkness, that patience could fix cruelty. But she had been wrong. Some people only see boundaries as challenges and pride as more important than respect. Looking out over the city, she smiled softly. My no wasn't a challenge, she whispered. It was a line, and I paid dearly for letting guilt blur that line. The words didn't hurt anymore. They just felt true, like closing a book she had finally finished reading. Below, she could see the workers leaving her new firm, Crawford Design Studio. The sign above the entrance glowed faintly in gold letters. That name was hers. That dream was hers. No one could take it again. Every blueprint she drew now carried her initials, proof of her endurance, her voice, her power. She thought of Ethan one last time, not with anger, but with finality. "You turned my world upside down," she murmured, the faintest smile on her face. "But I built it back stronger." The city lights shimmered like stars beneath her, and she felt a peace that went beyond victory. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming herself, the woman who once doubted her worth, now standing taller than ever. Inside, the office was quiet. The walls held sketches of future projects, homes, parks, and community spaces meant to bring people together. She realized that this was her real revenge, to keep creating, to keep building, to keep living without bitterness. As night fell, Lena turned off the lights and took one last look at the city she had helped shape. It no longer reminded her of what she lost. It reminded her of what she became. And in that stillness, with the hum of the city below, she found something far greater than closure. She found peace, strength, and the calm of finally being free.